Hi, Disney. If you're watching, let me play Milo Thatch in your live action Atlantis. Thank you.
As a kid, I always wondered, what movies would I have made by the time I turned 21? Would I still suck, or would I suck a little less? Well, that day is coming in a few weeks, and needless to say, I still suck. But at least I don't have to rely on my toys to act in my films anymore. In the last few months, I've been writing a few shorts, trying to develop and outline an idea for a feature film, and trying to raise money for a high-end short I'm planning to make in the next year. But with all that going on, I would find myself getting really depressed as soon as I'd stop working on any of those. The last short I did was in October, so I've been yearning to get back on set to make something new and improve from my last. I'm sure I'm not the only one when I say that as soon as I finish one short, I can see all of its flaws and want to make another one where I can fix those problems to find more issues so I can improve and at least be decent at this. For example, my last short was Mischief Night, and because I wanted to get it out before Halloween, I didn't give myself time to step back from the edit, and now when I look back at it, I just see areas that could have been trimmed down. Then I start feeling crappy because I think about how if I died right now, that would be the last short I leave on this earth, which means I'd be forgotten and never remembered, even though I spent the majority of my life with the dream. What's the point of moving on when all we do is damage? Point is, I wanted to make another movie really badly, but the main issue was time. I go to school full-time, have an internship, and I do freelance work making videos. Thankfully, there's spring break. I knew I had to take advantage of this free time, so before I even had a script, I set out 2 days for production, March 11th and 12th. I asked a handful of friends if they'd be willing to help me that day, and thankfully most of them said yes. Then I started writing. I knew what my budget limitations were, so I tried writing around that. I wrote 3 different scripts, but they all required a lot more than I was able to do. There were around 10 days left before production, so I had to really take a step back and figure out what I actually had access to. I thought of an old location we used for a high school project a few years ago that could look pretty cool. I also know the woods are free, as far as I know. But most importantly, I know a great actor friend, Nick, who you might recognize from my last short.
Who?
He's calling you.
Renee, yes sir.
This guy's extremely talented and has a bunch of skills that I could take advantage of. For example, while writing Radio Tower, I needed the 2 teenagers to get the gun away from the 2 agents. Then I remembered that Nick is a freaking black belt, so he could just kick it away. This just goes to show how helpful it can be if you have the privilege to write for someone you already know. You can think about what their strengths are and use those to the film's advantage. The overall idea for Radio Tower came after I made a list of what I might have access to. I knew Nick, I knew my friend had a bike, my dad has a truck, and I have a drone, so maybe the scene can open up with some teenager running away from the cops in his bike. The issue is that most cops drive in cop cars, and I only had a truck, so why not make them detectives or agents who are possibly spying on our hero before getting in this confrontation? And that's why they'd be in a red truck. But why would our hero be running away from the cops? And that's when I had the idea. In a lot of TV and film, we see the young kids trying to rebel from the more conservative adults, and they always end up saving the day. Well, what if there was a film where the dorky teens are actually the bad guys, and they're trying to end the world rather than save it? After writing the script, I knew what props I needed, so I quickly started out on that. The most time-consuming prop was the book that was used to summon the creature at the end. This was heavily inspired by the Necronomicon from The Evil Dead, and even had prop pages I found online from its remake. If you're thinking of making one of these, there are a lot of tutorials on how to do it online, but my biggest recommendation is to not use plastic wrap. Like, at all. Because by the end of the shoot, the outside of the book was completely falling apart. I would have to ask Nick to cover big patches up with his hands since we didn't have painting supplies on set. I've seen some people use clay, and that seems like a more durable and reliable option. Now, if this was high school, I probably would have used my friends to act as the agents, but I had a feeling that wouldn't really work now. Or ever, actually. So I contacted Dan, who was in a short I did my freshman year of college, and he agreed to help out with the role. For Agent Ross and Raven, I put out a casting call online, and I'm so thankful to have found Daryl and Rachel. I felt like all of the actors had good on-screen chemistry, even though they literally met an hour before shooting. They were casted around 5 days before we started filming and were gracious enough to volunteer their time. Now, I'm extremely grateful that I can find the cast and crew who are all willing to work for free, but because of this, as a director, I had to be extra sure that I can be as convenient as I possibly can. That means having essentials like food and water. I'd wake up an hour earlier to make sandwiches and hot dogs for people. I bought snacks like cookies and fruits and made sure everyone had plenty of water, especially since we were filming all day. It's important to make people feel cared about. Whether it's buying them Starbucks in the morning or bringing McDonald's to everyone, you need food, and if you're purposely not wanting to spend money on food and drinks for your crew, then I'm just gonna say it, you're a dick. Ideally, you want to avoid super sugary stuff and carbs, especially if it's a bigger set, because then everyone starts to get drowsy and their low energy will impact the film. I also made sure to buy as much clothes as I could for the actors, especially shoes and pants. I knew there was a chance that their clothes would get really dirty and I didn't want them to come to set, work for free, then go home in their ruined clothes thinking about how they're going to have to replace it. So I spent an entire day driving to different Goodwill and thrift stores where I found all of their outfits. Except for Nick's. Sorry, Nick. In my opinion, it's the small details like this that makes it count. Let's say I didn't get extra clothes or food and water. We'd be out in the thick Texas heat. The actors would be hungry and thirsty and would be getting all of their clothes dirty. For understandable reasons, they're going to want to rush the production, go home, and never see my face again. So my message to directors who are just starting out, care for your cast and crew. They're humans too, and they have absolutely no reason to want to help you, so be grateful they're on set with you and make sure they're cared for. For production, we only had Wednesday and Thursday to film because on Friday, it was set to storm, so that was completely crossed off. Also, we literally finished filming right before the entire quarantine happened, which we got so lucky for. On our first day, we were struggling. The Texas heat came in strong that day. Pair that with a packed schedule and it's gonna be tough. But thankfully, everyone pulled through. For my crew, I had Sierra as AD, makeup and behind the scenes, Amani as the assistant camera, Dozer as my production audio, and Jared as the key grip and second behind the scenes. Even though the weather conditions were not favorable, I never heard a single complaint from anyone. It was an all hands on deck shoot with everyone doing a little bit of everything to get this film made. In the beginning, I set up a large shower curtain to act as diffusion, but even with a bunch of sandbags on it, the wind caused it to tip forward. Thankfully, there was no one nearby when it fell. However, I didn't want to risk having it fall and hit someone later. Ideally, we would have had 2 grips hold it as we filmed, but there weren't enough people on the crew to do that, so we put it away and used my smaller diffuser. We used the DIY dolly for a lot of the shots and lit everything only using the sunlight, a diffuser, and a reflector. This made it easy to move quickly since we didn't have to worry too much about moving lights around. The only unfortunate thing is that since we filmed throughout the entire day, the lighting kept changing, so I had to do my best to match that with color correction. On the second day, we wrapped up all the scenes in the woods and headed to the field to film the opening and ending scenes. For the opening shot, I rode behind Jared's car and had Nick bike towards me. Dozer was right there next to me, not only to hold me and make me feel special, but to signal Nick or the truck to stop. We only did this take a few times simply because the sun was going down, and if Nick got too tired, it could be a bit dangerous. And just a quick PSA, don't ever force anything on your actors, especially with stunt work. This could be a dangerous shot, and if someone doesn't feel comfortable doing it, then it's not up for debate. You have to cut it out and figure out another way to pull it off. Before the first take, I talked with Nick to make sure he was comfortable with everything. I told him what I was looking for, but expressed that I want to do what feels safer for him. Daryl was also instructed to not get too close to Nick, just in case. We also went through a similar procedure with the shot where Nick kicked stand. For that scene, Nick and I talked about different ways he could knock the gun out, and we went from there. We also made sure that Dan had something to fall on, so he brought a big beanbag. Not as good as a proper crash mat, but for a small fall like this, it keeps the actors from scraping themselves. Thankfully, we were able to get both the kick and the truck shot without anything going wrong. I wanted to film this opening with a 50mm to get that tighter focal length, but I only had the 35 and the 85mm. The 85 is way too tight on a micro four thirds sensor and would have looked awful since the Pocket 4K has no image stabilization, so I had to go with the 35. Production wrapped, but that doesn't mean we were done. Since we were moving so fast, there were some inserts that we weren't able to get. Luckily, while I was cutting out and combining shots, I realized that I can fake some of these shots by myself. For example, all the low angles looking up at the sky, I got those right before I shipped back the anamorphic adapter I rented. Then we got the rest of the inserts using my Mavic Pro paired with Moment's anamorphic lens. We didn't have time to get these shots on our second day, but I knew I'd be able to make my little brother look like Nick from the chin down. Unfortunately, we had to drive up to this location 3 different times. In this first one we did, I told my little brother Ruben that he can just wear a dark shirt and it should be fine since we'll only see it for literally 1 second. Unfortunately, it was so obvious it wasn't Nick, even if you only saw it for a few frames. On our second attempt, we dressed Ben up with similar clothes to Sam, and when I was editing that day, I realized I forgot the backpack. So we went back that same day and finally got the shot. The big lesson here was that slow and steady wins the race. I was trying to hurry up and get the shot, and because of that, I had to drive back to that same location 3 different times. I also learned that I completely underestimated how tricky it would be to fly the Mavic so low to the ground while keeping up with the subject and still staying a safe distance. While editing the film, not only did I realize shooting handheld gave me back issues, but I also realized we completely forgot a small scene that was in the script. This would have shown the agents running into the woods, with Nick hiding behind the bushes as they passed by, and then he would run in the opposite direction. Now, there's a few reasons as to why we forgot. First of all, in the shot list, my descriptions weren't good enough, so while I was cutting shots off on the fly, I thought we had already gotten them, so I crossed them off. The second reason why I think I forgot is that maybe I subconsciously knew I didn't need it. I had the first rough cut completed before I realized we completely forgot to film it, and guess what? I couldn't tell. That scene would have just slowed down the pacing and have wasted more time. My original shot list had, I think, around 90 shots total. When I made it the night before, I was worried because the shot list felt way too long, but even after I trimmed it, I knew it was going to be tough. Then as we started filming, I realized that we definitely don't need 90 shots to tell this 4-minute story. But to be fair, I thought this was going to be a 7-minute film at first, so the big lesson I took away here is that if I make a shot list and I say I'm done with it and that's the most we can do, I can probably still cut that in half. After I edited the film using proxies in Premiere, I spent 2 weeks working on all the VFX, Foley, sound design, sound mix, and color grade. We shot this using the Pocket 4K, and I've gotta say, I love the highlight roll-off on this thing. I switched from an A7S, which is a very good camera, and it's what I'm using to film this BTS, but the highlights can be pretty bad sometimes. Also, quick side note, we used my Fuel World monitor, which was so helpful when filming out in bright conditions. But unfortunately, the mount that it was on came loose, even though I tightened it, and this caused the monitor to fall on the top handle and crack. So now I have a dead pixel near the middle of the screen.
Oh, now you want to see that? Oh, see, that's, oh man, thank God you caught that.
Way to go, man, you jinxed
I
it.
kicked it. I kicked it.
It's not that bad, and it could have been way worse, but I just bought this thing a few months ago. Plus, now it really bothers me seeing a white pixel there, but I guess it's just me being picky. Okay, just needed to get that out of my system and get closure. Back to post-production. I did all the VFX inside After Effects, not counting the ending shot where I used a combination of Element 3D, Cinema 4D, and 3ds Max. I laid out all of my sound files in Premiere, then I took that over to Audition where I did the final sound mix. For the music, I used Ben Worley's 80 synth pack that I bought from Triune Digital. I edited and removed some of the stems to make it fit with the tone I was going for, and I had my music. I would have loved to hire a composer, but I wanted to keep this film's budget under $100, so I just used what I already owned. Which leads me to my final point. Filmmaking is a creative outlet, and you should never let your budget stop you from creating. Figure out what resources you have and use those to your advantage. If you don't have an amazing camera or lighting gear, write something that takes place outside. If you don't have a tripod, write something that would fit the handheld look. Or if you don't have any equipment to get good audio, make a silent film. I heard those are making a comeback.